back a year ago.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Beer Bound podcast. Today, we're joined by Alan Norman from Tire Shack Brewing. Tire Shack Brewing can be found in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. Situated inside a renovated former auto garage, Tire Shack Brewing Co. is producing some delicious and creative beer styles on the East Coast. They aim to change your perception of what beer can be and are always releasing new styles. Their lively taproom is the perfect place to spend an afternoon away from the office or a memorable evening with friends. Along with the wide array of beer styles that can be found at Tire Shack Brewing, these include IPAs, sours, Mexican lagers, and more, Alan decided to put a twist on the creation of a brew available at Tire Shack currently. This is entitled the Garden Party Saison. What makes this beer particularly unique is that the recipe wasn't designed by a human, but rather the artificial intelligence chatbot, ChatGPT. We look forward to learning more about this particular Canadian brewery and what they've been up to. So we welcome Alan to the Beer Bound podcast. How are you doing, Alan?
I'm great, man. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be here.
Pleasure is ours, of course. So maybe, Alan, you could start off explaining a little bit more about the brewery. When did you guys get started? How have things been going? Maybe talk a little bit about COVID. The floor is yours.
Yeah, for sure. So we opened, first of all, we're in an old abandoned auto garage here in Moncton. So this building actually has been around since the 70s, and it's always been called the Tire Shack. So we find in the East Coast, people kind of know where things are, not so much addresses, but if if we said John and Dominion, people will be like, where's that? But we say the Tire Shack. They're like, oh yeah, we know where that is. So it just made sense to keep the name and breathe new life back into this space. This building sat abandoned for about 3.5 years. And we were living in Toronto at the time. And we were both from New Brunswick, my wife and I. We really wanted to get back out here and to open a brewery. And we thought that this was the perfect space, but we just thought it was going to be too much work because it was run down. It was a dump in here, basically. But we bit the bullet and we bought the property and we did most of the renos ourselves. It took about 11 months, the process, to renovate this place into a brewery. And we opened November 9th, 2019. And then COVID happened 4 months later. So the timing was pretty bad. It probably couldn't be worse. And we didn't have global pandemic in the business plan. So we had to kind of do what everyone else did and just kind of figure it out. But luckily, people were really thirsty during the pandemic. So, there was a lot of beer being drank and it worked out well for us. And we're having a great time and things are going really well. We're expanding right now as we speak. We're building a 5,600 square foot expansion next door. So more beer, more event space, and we have a rooftop patio that we're doing as well. So we're pretty excited.
So Alan, can you tell us maybe a little bit about your experience with beer? What inspired you to open a brewery? Maybe take us back. Do you have a business background? How does one even go about creating a brewery at all in New Brunswick, in Canada, anywhere?
Yeah, so my experience with beer, I think it kind of starts like similar to a lot of people. So being from New Brunswick, we didn't really have a lot of options when I was younger. And I didn't really think too much about beer. I kind of thought it was just one bland thing. But when I was 19, I went on exchange in university. I went over to England and, there's a bazillion new beer style, like a whole door just opened for me, especially with cask beers. I didn't know what those were. So a lot of stuff going on just in England. And then as you travel through Europe, because it's very easy to do, everything's so close together, every country's beer, every country just had so many different beers and beer history, and they were so different. I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't understand how it could be so different in such a close range. And I just really kind of fell in love with the history of that and the different beer styles. And I just kind of got more and more into it. And then you just kind of go down the rabbit hole. And then when I got back over to North America, just traveling in the US, there was a lot of crazy stuff going on. And I lived in Toronto, and there's a great beer bar called Smokeless Joe's downtown. They used to bring in a lot of really cool stuff. And then I got into home brewing, started brewing on my stove, got into beer judging, BJCP beer judge. And then I just really fell in love with all the breweries that were opening. And I thought it was just such an amazing business that you could own a brewery and take a 5,000-year-old product and, make it exciting and new again, and be creative with that product and use it to bring people together. I love that idea. And I just fell in love with the industry, and I really wanted to be a part of it. So that's kind of how I dove into it. And it's really hard. It's hard to open a brewery. It's pretty crazy. And you really have to love it. You really have to be passionate about it, because there's a bazillion things that can go wrong, and a lot of things that could, sidestep you every step of the way. But it's amazing, and we're really happy that we did, and we're having an amazing time. So yeah, it was the right decision for sure.
Did you have a business background, Alan, beforehand? Like, are you an entrepreneurial guy by nature?
So I guess I was self-employed for quite a long time. I did a lot of film and TV in Toronto. So a little bit of business background there, to always kind of be going to auditions and being in that world. But no, I worked in a lot of bars and restaurants and stuff. So I kind of really knew the business inside and out from that standpoint. So those skills actually translated really well to running a brewery. And my wife, she had a lot of experience in Toronto. She worked for TJX, so she was a buyer with them. So she has a really firm background in the sales side of things, and procuring ingredients and that kind of stuff. So it's been really it's worked out really well for us.
Before we get back into beer, can you, for folks who are listening who are maybe outside of New Brunswick or probably more outside of Canada, can you tell us a little bit about the city of Moncton, the province of New Brunswick, what makes this particular place special, maybe in association with beer or just in general? Is that where you're specifically from, Alan? You're from Moncton?
Yeah, so we grew up in Moncton, in New Brunswick. We both did. And it's a really exciting time to be in Moncton right now. It's the fastest growing city in Canada, which I never thought that would ever happen, but it's just wild here. It feels like the wild, wild west. We have cranes all over the city. There's so many construction projects happening. We're getting a lot of people like myself that moved away for more opportunities. Those people are now moving back. And it's just a really exciting time to be here. The whole East Coast in general. It's a beautiful, beautiful place in the summer. Moncton's about 15 minutes from Shediac, which is a great beach community. So, to be at the beach in 15 minutes is absolutely insane. I love it. I can't believe it's possible from so many years on Toronto traffic. And it's an amazing place to be in the summer. The winters are fine, can be a little cold, can be a little snowy at times, but overall it's a Canadian winter, so nothing too crazy.
So comparing Moncton to a larger metropolis like Toronto, say, can you give a little bit of a comparison? What are some similarities or differences between the beer culture that exists in Toronto? Toronto, obviously, it is a major player in North America, is becoming more of an international city in the entire world. I think we have in Toronto about 60 breweries, something like that. So yeah, it's pretty easy to find good craft beer kind of all over the place. And you have to really pinpoint different neighborhoods that you want to check out. Can you compare it a little bit to Moncton? Obviously, Moncton is a smaller city, but as you mentioned, it's the fastest growing city in Canada. I actually didn't know that. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, I know that New Brunswick has a bit of a reputation for its growth because it's more of an affordable province, certainly compared to Ontario, that's just astronomically expensive. So folks wanting to kind of have more of a home ownership opportunity or
that's
a little bit more of a comfortable lifestyle.
Your money goes a lot farther down here, and it's much more laid back lifestyle, right? So yeah, that's what's fueling the growth for sure. And in terms of the two differences, I mean, like, obviously Toronto is very cutting edge. I would say sometimes Toronto would have like access to ingredients that we might not be able to get to just yet. The scene is ultra competitive in Toronto. It's competitive down here, but not in the same way. It's growing very fast, and I'd say we're a couple of years behind with some styles that things are kind of becoming more of a thing now that maybe they were in Toronto 3 or 4 years ago. But yeah, I mean, beer is beer, and with the internet and everything now, and people are traveling, so I mean, it's very similar. It's just not as ultra competitive as Toronto, I would say. And it's very collaborative down here. Like, people are are very friendly, and we're always kind of chatting with each other. And yeah, it's not as cutthroat, and I don't feel like we're always in competition with each other as much as maybe it would feel like sometime in a larger city.
Alan, do you know a little bit about beer history in the province of New Brunswick? Maybe some stories that associate with Moncton. Has Moncton always been a brewing town? Are you aware of maybe some of its beer history and some of its connection?
I mean, Moncton, I don't really know too much specifics about brewing in Moncton. Like I know we had like our first brew pub here probably in 1999, but New Brunswick in general has got a great brewing history. This is where Moosehead is from, in St. John. So the Olin family, started Moosehead, I think it was back in 1879 or 1867. 1867 is when it was, the same year that Canada became a country, which is pretty fascinating. So, that is a massive part of New Brunswick's history. And it's pretty cool to see that beer, available all throughout Canada, also in the US and other around the world now, actually. So it's pretty great. Moosehead definitely has cast a large shadow in this province in a good way. Like it's great. And there's somebody that we definitely look up to for sure with the success that they've had. It's truly remarkable.
Now, Moncton, now you mentioned that there is a growing craft beer scene. Do you know how many craft breweries there are in the city?
We have 8 right now. Yeah. And I would say that 4 of them are within the last 3 years. So it's really kind of starting to take off. And it's great because, high tides float all boats. And, more breweries bring more awareness to craft beer, gets more people interested and involved in beer, and more collaborative for us. Moncton's a pretty small city in terms of the space it takes up. So, a lot of people hit a bunch of breweries in one night. You can walk to them. A lot of people bike. So it's great. It's great for the community, and it's really starting to take off here.
You tell us about the most difficult challenges. You said my colleague Garrett and I were connected with craft brewers all across Southern Ontario and Toronto, and we've heard many, many tales of the trials and tribulations that go towards starting these passionate projects of creating beer and going about the journey of creating this brick and mortar institution that is a craft brewery. So can you tell us a little bit about this particular roller coaster, maybe some of the most outrageous or high-end challenges that you've had in the last few years?
Oh man, I just feel like there's too many to count. But there's always great things happen, bad things happen. There's always something that can go wrong. You're working in an industrial environment, so you're working with a lot of equipment, and equipment likes to break down at the most inopportune times. So, we've had some issues with our chiller, with our mill, with our boiler. And then obviously we had the whole COVID situation. That was a pretty wild time. But and then a lot of with closures and stuff like that. But overall, I'm going to be optimistic about it. It's pretty great, to be able to walk into your business every day and, you're making beer, you're making people happy, and you can pour creativity into it. I think the pros outweigh the cons for sure, because there can be many, many cons. Like right now, so we live a life of construction, it feels like. So we basically stripped this auto garage down to 4 walls and a roof. We stripped out the floors, we stripped out the old plumbing, all the electrical, and we built it back up. So that was, when you're dealing with an old garage, there's a million problems that can go wrong and did. But you deal with them. And now we're building another building, and that comes with a whole host of other challenges. Every day it's kind of like being bombarded with questions about, this isn't going to work. This might work. We got to do this. Where should we put this? We got to change the location of this. But it's all for the greater good. It's all worth it in the end. And it's kind of fun, actually, some days to come in and just be like, all right, what's the challenge going to be today? What are we going to have to deal with today? What fire do we have to put out today? So I'm just getting really used to it.
It's good. You seem hardened by the experience.
I'm hardened. Yeah, exactly.
Got some calluses. That's great. All right. Well, Alan, to be perfectly honest, I hadn't heard of your brewery prior to maybe a few weeks ago or a month ago, I should say, when your brewery was kind of all over the news. It was kind of made national headlines in some particular journalistic platforms that I follow, and maybe you can talk about that. What have you been up to, Alan?
Well, a couple of it's been a good year. Like I kind of know what you're alluding to. And before that, we got really lucky too. We won the Brewers Journal Canadian Brewery of the Year back in December. So that was pretty amazing. We've been fortunate enough to win a few golds at the Canadian Brewing Awards. And then what you're alluding to is we decided to have a little fun with the future. And we did a beer completely designed, inspired by AI, artificial intelligence. And it was a really cool project. It was something that we were really excited about trying. And it was a really great learning experience. And we had a lot of fun with it, and the beer turned out great. And it's just kind of exciting to kind of see where the future might be heading with artificial intelligence and brewing in general.
That's right. Well, I should say, if folks don't know, then you're probably living under a rock, but ChatGPT obviously has taken the world by storm, probably since November or December of last year, when it became, I think, the fastest downloaded app in the world, in history. So obviously it's a little bit of it's a chat bot in terms of you can ask it different questions and it will shoot out really rapid answers in a matter of seconds, and you can ask it any forms of questions, or can ask it to write resumes or papers or essays, and you asked it to build a particular beer. Can I ask the initial questions that you posed to ChatGPT?
Yeah, so I'll kind of walk you through the process. So basically we wanted ChatGPT and AI in general, because we did end up using another program too later on in the process. So we wanted to have AI completely design the beer, every aspect of it, even the label and the name. So we started by asking ChatGPT what it thought future beer trends would be, because, that AI is part of the future. So we had a little fun with that too. And it spat back a bunch of stuff, some really interesting things, some things I never even thought about before. But one of the things it spat back to us was alternative fermentables and grains. It thought that might be a future beer trend. And we were like, oh, okay, that sounds very interesting, because some of this stuff was quite out there, and I don't even think we have the equipment to do some of it. But that one was within our wheelhouse. So we're like, okay, alternative fermentables and grains. Tell us more. Like, what can you give us some suggestions about that? And then it spat back a bunch of recipes, not recipes at this point, but a bunch of flavor combination ideas. And when I say spat back, I mean like literally, a second or 2 seconds. Like, it does not take long for it to process this request and give you information. So we went through a bunch of stuff, and there were some really interesting things in there. But we said, okay, well, let's make this more specific to New Brunswick. So we're like, okay, can you make it more specific to New Brunswick? And it did. And one of the ideas was honey and lavender, which we have a lot of out here. So we're like, okay, honey lavender, what kind of beer would you make with that? It said, why don't you make a honey lavender saison? And we're like, wow, that's pretty smart. That those two ingredients go well with like a saison, like a field beer. Like, that's a great idea, AI. Thanks so much. But so then we're like, okay, what's the recipe? Like, can you design us a recipe for we wanted to do a 15 hectoliter batch of it. So can you design a 15 hectoliter batch size recipe for that? And it spat that back in about 1.5 seconds, the whole thing, very professional looking, everything looked great. I'll take a little break in the story to kind of say, this is the one area where AI did not do a very good job. We definitely needed some human intervention at this point, because it basically created a very, very watery 2.5% beer with not very much honey, like nothing for the honey. So we had to kind of play around with that just to kind of get that, to scale that up, because it did seem like it was like homebrew style recipe. Like, it looked a lot like something you see in a magazine or whatever, which is probably kind of where it got that info from. But everything else looked great. All the temperatures were correct. Everything was pretty spot on, except we had to do a little bit of fiddling with the recipe for the grain amounts and stuff like that, and the honey. But we did that later. We didn't want to interrupt the AI process. So then we're like, okay, what would you name this beer? And it suggested Garden Party, which it suggested a lot of things, but Garden Party seemed to really fit. It you know, honey, lavender, the saison. It was pretty clever, we thought. And then we asked it. This is where we use a different program. We asked it. Midjourney is a graphics program, and we asked Midjourney to create a label. So we're like, we have a honey lavender saison called Garden Party. Please design a label, and it designed a bunch of labels, which were all very, very good. Like I was really impressed at this point. Like all of them were very smart. They were very thought out. You could tell like there was some thought put into them, if that's possible. But the one we chose, it was really interesting because it had a honeycomb on it, but the honeycomb kind of looked like a cross between code and DNA, like just like the way that that it was designed. And then it had a big bee on it with a piece of lavender in the bee, with these great purple colors, the lavender colors. So we chose that. It rendered the graphic for us, and we were able to use it. And we went a little bit further, and we asked AI how we would market the beer, like how should we sell this beer. It gave great answers, but it's the stuff you would typically do anyways. But it was just fascinating to kind of see the whole process and see it just kind of like go through everything you asked and provide very good information. None of the information was bad or stupid or obsolete. It was all really current stuff that I thought was like, there's a big future in this. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but this is a tool that is probably going to be very commonplace in a few years in multiple industries, but for sure in this one, it was very fascinating.
Fascinating to say the absolute least. Obviously, Alan, you're a pretty curious guy, which launched you down in this journey in the first place to kind of see this, to allow artificial intelligence to go from the very beginning to the very end in the creation of this particular beer. So obviously you had some curiosity and some initiative to go about starting this particular project kind of throughout the entire journey. And then when you got to the end, how did you feel about this? Did it kind of make you more excited about the future, or do I dare say, does it kind of scare you for kind of making us all obsolete in the not too distant future?
I mean, it's kind of both. And like, it's never going to be like, I don't think it will ever make us obsolete, but like it can definitely augment things that we already do well, like that's kind of the feeling. But the feeling I got was like, yeah, it was exciting. It was kind of like creepy in a way, but it was also, I kind of had like a feeling of a letdown because it happened so fast. So we like planned this. We're like, okay, like we're going to all sit down and do this AI thing. And we're, this is going to take a few hours. This is going to be our night. And like, we were done in like about 25 minutes, half an hour. Like it did all of that so quick. And we were just all like, wow, like, should we ask it anything else? Like, what do we do now? Like it was crazy. Like it just was so fast. And, that really took us by surprise, how quick it was all done. It was over in a flash kind of thing. And so, yeah, that was my big takeaway. It was like, wow, like that did not take any time. And it's not really, it doesn't ask you questions. There's no discussion, you ask it stuff and it spits out results. So you can take it or leave it, right? Choose what you want and leave the other stuff. And it's just happening so quickly. It's mind-boggling. It's so yeah, like, so for future applications with AI, some things that we were thinking about is really dialing in automation. Like AI is going to be able to scour the internet and really be able to get your dial in temperatures for optimization for temperatures, pressure, all that kind of stuff, time, water numbers, like minute calculations that will really increase efficiency over time. And then, another tool, another way you could probably use it is with analytics, right? It could just scrub the internet for trends, for what people like online, what people are saying on social media, and it will have access to all that information instantaneously. And then it can, you could ask AI one day, like you probably ask it now, but like, what's the most popular beer with what hop or, what grain, whatever. And it would tell you, or like, I want to make a beer what's the cheapest beer I can make? What's the most expensive beer I can make? Like, like you could just ask it a bazillion things and it's going to be able to tell you, all this information. And it's crazy. It's mind-boggling data harvesting, basically.
I think the most telling part of what you said is the velocity in the entire process. Once you use ChatGPT, it really it can accomplish a task that would take a human being hours in a matter of seconds. So obviously you're a businessman, an entrepreneur. So speed is a vital part of anyone's entrepreneurial venture. So I guess I have to ask, is the Garden Party Saison the last beer that you've created? And now that you have this interesting funnel that you can use that is quite quick, and I would venture to say an efficient way of creating new and exciting beer styles that have connections to places like Moncton, like New Brunswick, would you go back to the traditional way of creating a new beer style, or is this the status quo now?
No. So like, yeah, AI is the last, Garden Party is the one and only AI beer style that we've created. We've done a couple other things since then, but we're a craft brewery. We're not going to forget what we're all about, right? We're not some big margin crunching global conglomerate brewery. We want to have fun, and we don't, we care about cost of ingredients, but we're not going to like squeeze every penny. We're not going to use it like that. We still want to have a good time and not get too involved with that part of it. But yeah, I think we're definitely going to use it again. And I think it's going to be more commonplace in the future. I don't think it's going to be something that we're always kind of, oh, let's go back to AI. But it's just a really interesting thing. And I think, love it or hate it, it's here to stay. This is kind of like the ground floor of AI, kind of like when iPhones came out or when the internet came out, when the television came out or the radio. It's one of those kind of groundbreaking new things, and I don't think it's going anywhere. So it's just going to be another tool in the toolbox for us that we sometimes resort to, and we'll see how things go. It's going to be exciting to watch it just in general, throughout the next couple of years. It's also going to be kind of terrifying. I don't stand on one side, and I think we've all seen Terminator 2. There's it's definitely scary, potentially, but at the same time, it's here. I think it's here to stay. So we're trying to embrace it a little bit and trying to not be scared of it and trying to, use it for good instead of bad.
Alan, as far as is Tire Shack Brewing the only brewery that you're familiar with that is utilizing AI, ChatGPT to create maybe beer styles or help in branding or marketing? What the industry pretty well, I'm sure. Is what you're doing unique? There's quite a few other breweries I think now that are definitely using it, and we actually found, we heard about a brewery in Denver that did it like way back when ChatGPT first came out. So that put the seed in our head. So we're not the first at this for sure. And I'm sure there's lots of breweries out there using this, but I don't think there's a lot. I think it's still, I think there's only a handful of us that are using it, and but I think it's going to be something that more and more people are going to at least try, dabble with, and see how it goes. But it's so easy to use. I think when people try it, they're going to be pretty impressed with what can happen in a very short time frame. Yeah. And it's and the caliber of the information, right? The caliber of the results you get are very high. It's very high quality results, I find. Yeah, definitely. We've used it a little bit. I mean, I've used it a little bit in my life in general, as I suspect most people have. It can be a very useful tool. It can be a very useful tool in many different ways, whether you want to write a speech for a wedding, or if you have something to write. I know that we along with this podcast, we do some video content. We have some YouTube series that we work on, and just assisting in some of the historical analysis, having some free research labor through ChatGPT is quite amazing. And really, I am taken back, and I couldn't agree more with just the speed in which it's done. It really just takes a 4-hour project and turns it into 20 seconds. I mean, it's remarkable.
Well, yeah, and one of the big things too is it does all the heavy lifting for you, right? It kind of does all that stuff that nobody really wants to do, especially with like data collection or you know, writing something out, like, you know, emails. It can respond to your emails for you now, you know, like it can just take a lot of stuff off your shoulders. That just takes up a lot of time and frees you up to do other things that might be a better use of your time. You know, that's kind of like the silver lining of AI that I see right now is what it can kind of do for, you know, just in the everyday mundane tasks that it can take care of.
Alan, I know you're not a fortune teller, but if you were a betting man, where do you see this taking us maybe in the next 5 years? So kind of information is the first step. ChatGPT and AI chatbots like it can create texts and create also different ones can create actual images, which is fantastic. But do you see this expanding to other parts potentially of your enterprise? Is this even happening now, assisting in the actual manufacturing process of your product? Do you see that kind of coming down the pipe?
Yeah, we're not using it in manufacturing here, but yeah, it's going to be a huge part of manufacturing. You know, it's going to be able to really streamline things and make things way more efficient from an operations perspective. I definitely think that you're going to see more and more stuff come online that uses AI. So that will be huge. And I really think too, for like from a marketing perspective, you know, like knowing who your customer is and you know, what their interests are, and being able to really target people and with beer styles. And I think that that's going to be a huge thing in the future here, because it just has access to so much information, you know, like it's pretty wild. I think there's so many applications for it, but I think that those are the two big ones, you know, like trends. It's going to be able to predict trends, spot trends, and really dive into those numbers. Yeah, no, it's going to be an interesting 5 years for sure. I think it's going to be, I think the growth curve is going to be exponential. Like it feels already exponential. Like you said in your intro, it came out in like November, I think, or December. Like it's crazy. That's not even a year. And it's become such a part of like life for a lot of people. And it's just been it just seems like everything you read or anything people talk about, it's somehow talking about AI. AI is incorporated or is now having something to do with that. And so, yeah, the next 5 years are probably going to be pretty wild. I don't even know if we can predict those 5 years, like, because I don't think these last 8 months anyone could have predicted with such like how fast it's kind of come on the scene and really taken over. It's pretty crazy. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, I hope we're all here in 5 years. Alan, you mentioned that there were some drawbacks, I guess you could say, or some deficiencies, some weak points that you had in the process. You mentioned it created a bit of a beer that was perhaps too light in terms of its alcoholic content, as well as not enough honey or not enough concentration in order to make that sort of a live, bold part of the actual beer. Were there any other parts of the process? You mentioned creating the label. It did that. It talked about marketing. You mentioned it gave kind of the generic answers to that. I suspect it talked about maybe, I don't know, utilizing social media in certain ways. I don't know, something like that. Like, yeah, were there other little flaws that you kind of had to troubleshoot and really edit down? Like, obviously, we've said this over and over again, ChatGPT is amazing because it's quick, but I've used it sometimes and I found that it has given me false information. It has given me information is probably collected from a source that wasn't true. So was there anything that you encountered like that you really did have to kind of pinpoint and take out? Did it maybe say that beer was used with the wrong ingredient, something like that?
Not in this case. This case, it was pretty cut and dry for it. But one thing that we did notice in the graphic design program Midjourney, it still really struggles with text. It can't put text up on the graphic. So we actually had to, make our own text. We use the font and everything and the colors, but we had to actually spell it out because it's just gibberish, to be honest. Like, it does not spell actual words. And that I mean, I'm just speculating now. I don't know why it does that, but I'm imagining it might come from the fact that there's just so many different languages, other countries are using AI too, and they're not speaking English, right? So perhaps AI is having problems deciphering how to spell words and stuff. But that was a huge problem. Like, it won't spell anything. It can't spell beer, it can't spell anything. So that, I'm sure, will get fixed quite soon. But yeah, that's kind of interesting to see it have such a problem with, the whole time you're talking to it, it's spelling out words to you, and this is a different program, a graphic program, but it's interesting to see it not be able to do any of those things. So yeah, so we'll see. Like I said, I'm sure that will get fixed soon, but because it's still learning. But yeah, that was a big eye opener for sure.
Interesting. Beer is such a fascinating, massive, multinational, multi-billion-dollar industry, because the way I view it is that there's kind of two different beer worlds existing. I mean, you can kind of break it down in a few different ways, but the way I see it is sort of the creative beer experimenters, folks who are interested probably more in the craft beer, North American craft beer trends of really opening up this new labyrinth, this Pandora's box into all these potential different flavors and substyles and genres that you can draw out of this one particular beverage. So I think that's really fascinating. And I think a brewery like yours really would tap into it, just because you just seem to be really interested. Tire Shack seems to be interested in experimenting and trying new things, which is fantastic. And I think most craft breweries in Canada and the United States would kind of follow this trend. But then there's also the world of beer that goes back, as you mentioned, the beverage is maybe 5,000, 7,000 years old, something like that. It's a very, very old industry. And it goes back to any even writing that we have as a species. So we don't even really know where and when it came from. So I mean, in terms of its European roots, it goes back really, really far. Countries like Czech Republic, Germany are very traditionalists. Obviously, Germany has legislation that keeps things very traditional by law. So I just think it's interesting. I think craft beer and craft breweries are really an industry that really jives well with this concept of artificial intelligence, because it kind of streamlines together. It goes parallel. Would you agree with that? Just sort of having this sense of craft beer to me is all about creativity. And so is artificial intelligence, so is tech.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like it's at the ethos of what we try and do here. Like, we open a craft brewery to be a part of the community, to be creative, to kind of change your perception of what beer can be, and to have fun with a beverage that, can be easily taken for granted because of, how long it's been around for. So we just wanted to, use that, step into that world and be a place where people can be together and talk to each other, like kind of what people have been doing for, thousands of years, sitting down over a beverage and talking. So yeah, being creative and using things that are going to allow us to be more creative, and also to allow a conversation to start. One of the reasons we also use the AI idea with the beer is because it can create and spark conversations. It's just, we want to, gets you thinking, wow, I didn't even think that would be a thing, or wow, I wonder what that AI computer beer would taste like. Just something to spark interest and be a part of the city and get people talking. And this is something where you can actually, because AI, it's kind of like we said, it's around everywhere, but sometimes it's at arm's length and you don't really have a way to kind of really access it. Here you can actually access it. You can come in and try the beer that was designed by AI. So it's kind of got a visceral feel to it, and you can hold the product and everything. So it's that we're excited about that aspect of it too, where you can actually, it's a tangible thing that now you're you're trying and you can talk about and stuff. So that was pretty cool for us to do that.
Alan, has this experiment helped you in any way? Like I mentioned, typically every day or every other day, I scour the internet a little bit and go on Google and type in beer or check out all the news that's going on around the world, because I like to keep in touch with what's going on in Canada, United States, and abroad. And there seemed to be like so many articles about you that kept popping up about the Garden Party Saison and just sort of the association with your project. It seemed to be all over the place. So has this sort of helped you in terms of growing the brewery, growing awareness of you folks? Has it helped you as a business?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's definitely been helpful. It's nice to kind of like, get your name out there and stuff. But like we just like the idea of the fact that it's a topical thing right now, and we're just there's a lot of really great breweries in this country, and we're just happy that we can be a part of the conversation somehow. Like we did this beer just for us and for the tap room and stuff, but it's great that it's getting so much attention and that people are interested in the story, because we think it's something that's going to be around to stay, and we're just happy to be a part of this kind of groundbreaking technology and be mentioned in the same breath as AI and craft beer in Canada. That's pretty cool for us. So yeah.
How does someone in Toronto find a Garden Party Saison, Alan?
I have a friend that comes down here with a big suitcase. I think that's the only way that can happen. Yeah, because unfortunately, due to provincial liquor laws, et cetera, we can't sell up there. And I don't know the ever-changing legalities of shipping beer to different provinces. So the best way is to have a friend that's in Moncton with a big suitcase.
A good excuse to travel to Moncton.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
Summer's beautiful. It's perfect time.
I'm sure. Well, Alan, I typically ask our guests as well, just because, as mentioned, as you know more than anyone, craft beer is an experimenting industry. It kind of brings creative folks who love the passion and the history and the craft of beer together to kind of experiment and to create something that is fundamental and foundational and kind of branch off from there. So obviously AI is having a massive effect, not only with your experiment, as you mentioned. I know there are a few other breweries, as you mentioned, you saw there was a brewery in Denver that was doing the same thing, and I'm sure lots and lots more will pop up. I wonder too, I haven't read anything about any macro breweries utilizing this, but I wouldn't be surprised if something came into the fold.
I think I'm not 100% on this, but I think I just saw something about Beck's doing something. Yeah, I think it was Beck's, and I haven't read the article or whatever, but I think I did just see something recently about that. So I'm sure they will, though. I'm sure they're gonna dabble into it for sure, and or they're even doing it right now with all the behind the scenes automation stuff that we don't even know about. Like they got the big bucks. So yeah, I'm sure they'll be using it very soon, if not already.
Right. Well, Alan, do you see AI as really kind of the front runner in terms of innovation and this piece of technology that will really shape the industry that you're so immersed in? Or do you see maybe, you're in the thick of it, do you see other technological innovations or other factors that are kind of coming into play? You mentioned trends. You're aware of kind of different marketing schemes, something like that. Can you predict or kind of tell us what you've seen that maybe will also shake up the industry, maybe in the macro beer space or this beer space that you're more familiar with, micro and craft?
It's tough. I definitely can't predict the future, but I definitely see AI being more of a player in this industry, but to personify it. But then I think like the wild card is human ingenuity, right? The whole point of craft beer and brewing is creativity and passionate people pouring their creativity into this beverage. So I think that we're going to come up with something interesting that hasn't been invented yet. There's been so many different styles and trends in beer over the last 25 years since the 90s. I'm sure there's something around the corner that's going to take over for a while and be really popular, and then there's going to be something else. So I think as long as we're making creative products, I think that humans are going to be on top there, because we just we think a little differently, and we think outside the box a little bit. So I think that that's our wild card for sure, to kind of keep it more human than machine.
Yeah, I sort of went on a bit of a rant on how craft beer goes quite well with something like artificial intelligence, just in the creative side of things. But I think they are antithetical in a way that you kind of touched on, in that I go to a craft brewery or I purchase craft beer at my local liquor store or beer store because I buy that instead of something like Budweiser or Heineken, because I'm buying a story. I'm buying the connection with community. I'm buying it because I know the brewery, the head brewer or the brewery owner. Like, I know these people. There's a face behind the product. I don't know. There's no face behind Anheuser-Busch, AB InBev. There's no face or community. It's completely faceless. It's lifeless. It's just buying a massive product that does have a lot of quality behind it. Like, you have to say that, but you really are, when you're buying craft beer, like, it really is the people, the connection, and the story that you're purchasing. So if, for example, Tire Shack Brewing just only went with artificial intelligence created beer, I think that probably might sink your ship, because you wouldn't want to always buy a AI craft beer, because it's kind of antithetical, as I said, to what the whole industry is about.
Yeah, I mean, we would never ever do that. And the thing too is, like, we made this beer and we're talking about it in a positive light, but it's definitely a polarizing project. Like, we haven't had any like blowback or anything, but like, sometimes people are like, like, why'd you do that? Computers, like, it rubs people the wrong way sometimes, and it's interesting, because, and at the end of the day too, like, we're all a little resistant to change, and this is a big change. This is a big shakeup. So that's obviously going to make people uncomfortable, especially when you have to think and get outside your comfort zone about those kind of issues. So yeah, like, it's definitely a polarizing subject right now, and we're fully aware of that. And it's not going to be something that we do. We're not going to be the AI brewery or anything like that. We have a lot of fun being creative, and always coming up with new stuff on our own. So, but yeah, it's just a new tool that's out there that we're not even sure how we feel about. AI. It's such an infancy. It's just a little baby right now, so it could grow up to be a horrible monster, like all these sci-fi movies that we see all the time. So we're definitely treading very lightly and just getting our feet wet for sure.
I mean, you mentioned, yes, AI is definitely in its infancy. Tire Shack, I mean, you're a fairly new company as well. You're not averse to trends like artificial intelligence, using technology kind of to spark interest and to be experimental. That's really unique. But maybe I like to ask this with a lot of craft brewery owners that I get to speak to. What sort of initiatives or projects or part of your business do you want to focus on maybe for the next 5 or 10 years? Is there a particular aspiration, a way that you'd like to expand? Is that maybe not? Are you sort of at the level of capacity of what you're doing that you're comfortable? You just sort of want to keep with the status quo? What are sort of the ambitions you have for the next 5, maybe 10 years?
Yeah, so we're actually in the midst of a pretty big expansion right now. So our original space is 4,800 square feet, and we're building a 5,600 square foot building, which should be completed in late July, early August. So we're almost there. It's going to be great. So that's going to bring our brewery up to about 10,000 square feet. We're going to have more brewing capacity. So we're going to double our capacity, which is great. We'll add a canning machine. Right now we use a canning service, a mobile canning service, but to have canning now in-house will be amazing. More cold storage. We're going to start a barrel aging program down here, something we've always wanted to do. We just don't have space. So, just another something that we're fascinated in, and we can be able to be creative with those barrels. We're also adding an event space so we can host weddings and corporate functions. Because right now we don't ever close our current space down for buyouts because we always want to be a community space so anybody can come in at any time and not have to worry about us being closed for something. And then the new space is also going to have a glass atrium rooftop patio that we're super excited about. It's going to be heated and cooled, so it's going to be 4 seasons. So in the winter, you'll feel like you're in a snow globe up there watching a snowstorm. And then in the summer, it's going to have a nice, great greenhouse feel. Very similar to, there's a brewery in New York called Evil Twin in Ridgewood in Queens, and it has a glass atrium structure like that. So it looks very similar to that. So we're really excited about that. And for us, we just want to be a big part of the community. So we're really active in charities and, giving back to community and just making Moncton a stronger place to be. And that's our big focus. So one thing I didn't mention is where our location is. It's technically in a bad part of town. It's a nice old part of town that has these beautiful old houses, but the last couple of decades, it's kind of down on its luck. And, we've gotten in here and we renovated this space and we're building a new space, and the community's starting to bounce back a little bit. And that's really great to see. And so we want to continue to be a part of that change and really bring back the respect to this community that it deserves, because it's a really great part of town that's kind of been neglected for a little too long. So yeah, that's kind of our big focus, really just being a great community citizen, a great civic citizen, and being like an integral part to Moncton. That's what's on our radar for the next couple of years for sure. We're the last thing I'll just add there is because we're really happy with the support that we've received from the community. It's been a really great experience, even with COVID and all the crazy stuff that's happened the last couple of years. It's been a fantastic experience and the community's really embraced us. So, we want to give back as much as possible.
It's wonderful to hear. Well, Alan, we're coming up on our hour mark, but maybe I'll end with one question. You've embarked on a project I think many individuals would like to potentially dip their feet in, whether it be home brewing to start, or maybe starting a contract brewery, or maybe going all in and having a brick and mortar location like you did. What piece of advice would you give to an individual who is interested in going into the world of entrepreneurship geared towards beer? Would you give some warnings? Would you give some encouragement? What would you initially say to someone?
Yeah, kind of like what I said a little earlier was that you really gotta love it. You gotta go in there because you gotta be doing this because it's something you're passionate about, because if you don't care, why should anybody else? And there's going to be really hard times ahead. And I don't mean that to scare people, but it's just like, there's a lot, you're dealing with a lot of equipment, you're dealing, if you have a tap room, that's a whole other business, dealing with people, having staff, and then, having a brewery that, makes beer that you're selling to the public, there's a lot of health and safety things involved there too. So it's certainly doable. There's no question. And I definitely encourage anyone that wants to do it. Just make sure you're passionate about it. That's all. Like anything else, just make sure that you really love it. And if you don't, there's just find something that you do just in general, but you just really have to be passionate about it because it's tough, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So go for it. If you love it, then do it.
Love the passion, love the creativity. Very awesome.
And make sure you are sufficiently capitalized as well.
Having some cash in the bank probably doesn't hurt.
Cash in the bank for sure. Yeah. Solid business plan and some cash in the bank. Definitely.
All right. Well, Alan Norman from Tire Shack Brewing in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. Obviously, you're doing a lot of really interesting things. The Garden Party Saison. If I'm ever in Moncton in the near future, I will be sure to stop by, and hopefully you still have some.
Yeah, we're going to do a live show from here next time, drinking garden parties.
I would love that. Well, Alan, thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and hopefully we can connect in the near future.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alan. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all our interviews and beer-related content. Remember, craft beer is here.